Great. So my name's Nate Bernitz. I'm a Community and Economic Development Field Specialist for UNH Cooperative Extension. Kendra, do you want to introduce yourself too?
Yeah, I'm Kendra Lewis. I am a Health and Wellbeing State Specialist with UNH Cooperative Extension.
Great. Well, I want to thank Melanie and Extension Foundation and Center Stage for having us today. And I'm going to just kind of launch into it. So what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to give you kind of a context around leadership development at UNH Extension. And then I'm going to introduce you to the leadership cohort. We're going to do an activity, talk about how the program was evaluated, and the end of the presentation will kind of shift into a discussion of how you might use the model at your institution or take elements of it as you and your teams think about leadership development for your staff. Okay, so the context. Big picture, Harvard Business Review, according to Harvard Business Review, poor leadership development pathways limit employee engagement and lead to turnover. I think that's both common sense and something that we all really feel, or at least we do here at UNH. Our Extension 2016 strategic plan, which we are operating under at the time of developing this leadership cohort, had three pillars. One of those was this idea of excite, where there are strategic imperatives to foster a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship and ensure staff and volunteers had professional development opportunities to develop their skills and embrace change, and to provide opportunities for staff to learn one another and work together across programs. And like any strategic plan, we as staff were asked, hey, tap into the strategic plan, link what you do to the strategic plan. I serve on our internal professional development committee, and it applies just as much to our committees as it does to our programmatic work and our positions. Kind of understanding that leadership development, there are so many opportunities to pursue leadership development through more traditional learning modalities. Extension Foundation offers some wonderful programs. There are certificates and online classes. I mean, local leadership programs, all kinds of things. But what I kind of honed in on was a lack of a peer-to-peer learning model for us. This really hits multiple needs because staff, especially in Extension where we're spread out all over the state, and there's isolation and really a desire to connect with one another. So the idea of really doing both at the same time was attractive. And I'll just say as well that as we kind of go through this slideshow, you'll see some call out quotes. So in this one, there's a call out quote on the right side. These are all quotes that come from the evaluation survey that we did of participants in the cohort at the end. And I'm not going to directly read them off the slides, but you can kind of see them as we go. So at this time, I want to encourage you to open up the chat and think about what initiatives does your institution have for leadership development. You can also raise your hand, and then unmute to share out loud, but you can put them in the chat. And this will kind of give us a sense of where our institutions, are at right now. So we'll take a minute for that. Different extension institutions are structured differently. In New Hampshire, we're a small state, so most of our professional development is done at the state extension level. It may be that in your state it's done at a regional level or even a county level, so that'd be interesting to hear too. Yeah, any thoughts people want to share? I see some people are still kind of coming in through the waiting room. Oh, interesting. Okay. So, people kind of going outside of the university and extension, breakout sessions with the annual staff conference. Interesting. Yeah. And we do some of that too. Well, feel free to keep kind of entering stuff into the chat, but I'll kind of keep going here. Okay, so what is the leadership cohort? First of all, this is a bottom-up concept. So it was, an idea, I guess, that I had within the, context of being part of the professional development committee. And so first I brought the idea to our professional development committee, and they provided some amazing feedback and helped shape the concept and, refine what the program was. And then they offered their support. And then, from there, I went to the leadership team and, again, they provided some, thoughtful, feedback and ultimately offered their support for the program too. It's a big ask in a way because it was a significant time commitment for staff. And that's, credit to the leadership team who, really sees this as a priority and, thought it was worth the time. At that point, we did some staff announcements and I organized an information session where people could join and, I would share a little bit more, ask questions. We recorded the session, shared the recording. And, in that info session, there wasn't a ton that was already decided. So, they were informed about the broad time frame. So it would be September 2022 to May 2023 with 6 sessions. And, really this idea that participants would be expected to make a commitment to the experience and make every effort to actually attend all the sessions. They were asked to express interest. And then for those that expressed interest, I did an availability survey to see if we could find a time that worked for most people to actually have that first session. There were, I think, 1 or 2 people that participated in the cohort that weren't available for that first session. But largely we found a date that worked for almost everyone. And so, going into it, there were a number of decisions that I thought the group was going to need to make, or that I wanted the group to make as opposed to me making it. So that was everything from the format to hold the sessions. Do we do them in person? Do we do them remote? Do we do them as hybrid sessions? How do we structure the sessions? Do people actually want this, what I called a distributed leadership model, and how would that work? I did select a book, which was mailed out, which was purchased and mailed out to all the participants, but we would talk about how we wanted to really use and leverage that book as well as incorporate other resources, even like how we would communicate with each other between sessions and what the conclusion of the experience would look like. The book that we used was titled Managing and Leading Nonprofit Organizations by Paul Dan, who's a member of the faculty here at UNH, someone I had taken classes with and knew really well and knew that he had supported leadership cohorts, in his role as, leading a social services organization in the state. And then I ended up working with Paul to actually come and be the guest speaker for our first session, and we worked together to craft an agenda for that. Kendra, can I hand it to you?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, but that's okay. So our first session, as Nate said, that we had the author of the book come in, really started with some facilitation and a presentation, giving us kind of an overview on leadership development and, a little overview of the book that we were using kind of as that guide. And then we spent the rest of that time really thinking about what we wanted to do as a group, so like what were those norms going to be? How often were we going to be meeting? What did we want this time together to look like? We talked about what were our own personal goals in terms of leadership, and then how did that relate to how we could work together as a cohort, and what we might kind of explore together. We talked about, there's different frameworks for organizations and teams, and how might we use these. There's some self-evaluation instruments on leadership. And so we took some time to kind of think about that and did some small group work. So that first session really did a lot of that exploring together and thinking about what leadership meant to each of us, and what we, wanted from that time together, in exploring our leadership journeys. You can go to the next slide, Nate. Thank you. So then after that first session, again, we all spent time together finding, we selected the dates in advance of what we wanted to do. We went through the book to think about what are the topics that we really wanted to talk about with each subsequent session. For example, there's a chapter in the book that talks about supervision and management, and we decided that wasn't a topic that we wanted to cover, that this leadership was really about leadership outside of that sort of role. We also had supervisors together in the room with the people that they supervised. And so we wanted to, make it a safe space and comfortable for everybody. So again, it was just, that was not a priority for discussion for us in this time together. So in that first session, we came up with some of those topics. And then people came together in groups, and worked together to then create what are these subsequent sessions look like. And it was completely up to the group that was leading it. So when I led a certain session, I met with my partners and we decided this is what we're going to have this session look like. Here's what we're going to focus on, and here's what we're going to make that look like. So some groups decided to do more discussion time and have time either in small groups or large groups discussing certain questions or different prompts. Some groups had us do homework. And so a couple weeks before the session, they might send us out either some things to read or something to do, maybe to take a certain leadership assessment or survey to kind of just get a sense of what our responses were on that and bring it back to the group. Some groups use the chapters of the book really as a guide, and some of them did not. Some of them found, resources elsewhere related to whatever topic they were bringing to us that day. And again, some had some different self-assessments. So really it was completely up to the groups leading it in terms of what that looked like. So we went with this distributed leadership model where every participant in the group was helping plan some sort of session and then facilitating that in a small team. Our very last session, that one we had in May, we had our leadership team come. So 2 of the members of our leadership team came. We only have 3 of them, so a majority of them were there. And they were talking about their professional journeys. They told us, how they got where they're going. They talked about their different approaches to leadership and thoughts about how we could cultivate leadership within our organization. And then members of the cohort also got to ask them questions and really shared their thoughts and ideas and what we learned and what we gained from this time together as a cohort. All right, I think you can go to the next one. Yeah. So we're going to take some time to do a breakout activity. We've got some prompts here that we'll put in the chat for you too. So just thinking about leadership isn't just about being a manager, right? And so again, we decided not to have really a lot of conversations about what it means to be a supervisor when we were talking about leadership. It's about how you approach your work, no matter what your position is. So what's an example of how you've brought strong leadership skills to your team? And on that same team, how could you have improved your leadership skills? And another prompt is to reflect on an example of how you've helped develop leadership skills in someone you've worked with but don't supervise. So you can take some time to reflect on these on your own. We're going to give you 15 minutes total. So when you go into your breakout room, if some people in the room need a little bit of time to think and maybe jot down some of their thoughts, respect that. Give everybody maybe a little 5 minutes or so to kind of think about that, and then about 10 minutes to discuss. If everybody in the room is ready to talk as soon as you get in there, that's totally fine. So just kind of take a sense of what it is that you need in your room, but know that you're going to have 15 minutes total. So my clock says it's 2:19, so we'll bring you back just about 2:34, 2:35. So I will get those prompts into the chat. And then that way you will hopefully be able to pull up the chat again once you're in there. And we'll broadcast them as well. But they're in the chat now, so maybe you could copy and paste them really quick just in case they don't show up in the chat. But once you're in your breakout room, you should be able to open the chat and still see those prompts there. All right, so I think we can go ahead and open up the breakout rooms.
Maybe everyone's all talked out.
I know, that's true. That's true. I don't know, Nate, you and I could share. I remember from this cohort, something I really learned was I bring a lot of empathy to my leadership. And I think really this cohort helped me realize that empathy is a leadership skill, that being able to connect with the people I supervise, but also just the people on my team and anybody I'm working with really just helped build those relationships. It helped us build the trust, just, having a sense of understanding. And I, for a long time, just felt like, that wasn't necessarily a skill you needed to be a leader. But as I looked more and more at the leaders that I worked well with and that I respected, they had that sense of empathy and understanding and compassion for those around them. So that was something that I think came up a lot for me in the conversations that we had through this cohort. Anyone else want to share?
One of the things that Linda brought up in our group, she talked about mentoring and making sure to, back when she did supervise staff, that she would always make sure that they were, assigned with a mentor or someone that they could work well together with. And I think that's been something that, for myself in my own career, that's been very supportive and helpful over the years. So that's really a great thing as well. One thing I talked about was a little bit about like finding skills or those strengths that your team has, or maybe even those that you don't supervise as well, and trying to find more opportunities for them to grow in that, and kind of stretch those muscles or strengthen those muscles to keep building those skills.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing.
And there's so much research on how impactful mentorship is, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to teach people, how to be better mentors and better mentees and to be even more productive in what we know is so impactful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to chat a little bit about how we evaluated the program. I put together a pretty lengthy survey. And I kind of was upfront with people like, hey, this has been a really meaty experience and this is a meaty survey. But I think it's really, really important that everyone takes it and takes the time to do it. And I was really pleasantly surprised, 14 of the 17 participants completed it. The 3 that didn't complete it, that kind of gets back to the commitment. And of the 17 people, not all 17 were equally committed to the process in general. I think some people started off with great intentions and maybe weren't able to follow through as much as they wanted to. And it really was, a significant commitment. We're talking about most people participating in person. So there was a lot of driving, 6 sessions that were 9 to 1 o'clock, plus out of, research and, reflection and whatnot in between sessions, and the task of working with several other people to plan a session as well. So it was a lot. But I focused on getting feedback on one, like, how did people feel about their participation? And, really getting at that very topic. Of course, basic questions about their satisfaction, but expectations was an interesting one. And we got some really interesting feedback that we'll, go into in a second. But really, did your expectations of the cohort match what you actually experienced? Pursuing leadership opportunities. This is really, hey, are you more likely to actually pursue leadership opportunities as a result of participation in the cohort? When we started, that was something we talked about early on, which is, hey, why have you joined this group? Some people said, pretty explicitly, like, hey, I want to pursue formal leadership opportunities. Some people were looking more to focus on developing their leadership skills, but not necessarily in the context of, pursuing a promotion or some sort of formal position. And there was, by the end, we saw more people were interested in pursuing leadership than when we had started. How people felt about their commitment to the cohort, whether people would recommend participation to other staff. This is often like the key metric, key question when you do any sort of survey is really whether someone would recommend it to others. And, that it was gratifying to see overwhelmingly that they would. And then recommendations for administration on, hey, how can you better cultivate leadership development opportunities? There were some key takeaways in the midst of a lot of data. They were, participants were really, really, pleased with, overall, the communications and the organization and the discussions and networking. A little bit less satisfaction with the book that we chose and the guest speaker. I think that there was probably less satisfaction with the book than the guest speaker. And that was a topic that came up repeatedly in the cohort, was whether this book was serving our needs. I think some people liked it more than others. I think that's definitely something, if you're going to look at implementing something like this, it'd be worth a conversation and research on what book you might want to use, or if you want to use a book at all. The peer facilitation, essentially, people liked the model. They thought some groups did a better job than others, which is to be expected. There were some really constructive recommendations for leadership development for the organization. Definitely, from an expectations perspective, some people went into it thinking that it was going to be a more traditional leadership development program, where you're learning hard skills. How do I become a successful leader? And like I had said in the beginning, there are so many opportunities to learn those hard skills, and you don't necessarily need a peer-to-peer model to do that. So how do we take advantage of the fact that it was a peer-to-peer model with more emphasis on the reflection, team building, and discussion? And people really liked that. Even the people that, expected something different, largely they thought it was better than what they had expected. So really, really great results there. Kendra?
Yeah. So some actionable items that we got from people in that evaluation report, some of the things we recognized were, choosing a different book. Again, as Nate said, some people really didn't particularly like the book, and integrating some other media, like maybe having a podcast. And we did have some groups that had us read articles outside of the book. One group also had us watch a clip of The Office. That was just a classic, no in terms of like conflict resolution. But there could have been more of that, thinking of different ways to integrate some other sorts of media. Having some sort of attendance required. This came up in a couple of different kinds of comments in a couple different places in the evaluation of just having that commitment from people. So again, our commitment really varied from, in terms of how much people were attending. Most people attended, I think, a good chunk of the sessions, but I think several people had to miss one, and then other people just clearly were not as committed there. So thinking about, well, what would that attendance requirement be, especially because the way that our cohort became so, talking about being non-traditional and talking about some of these different things, it just really didn't fare well when somebody wasn't there. It was changing the group dynamic. And so we, thinking about, well, let's have respect for our peers and commit to this. only if you can and have the time, because we're putting in this time and effort in sharing some things that might be hard for us to share. Somebody else suggested maybe having more of a retreat model. Again, we had some time to get to know each other through discussions, but because we were only there for 4 hours, you know, and we needed to have lunch in there somewhere and also talk about the next session, you know, some of those conversations might have been cut short. And so having, you know, more of a retreat model might give us that more time to really get to know one another and kind of dig into some of those topics a little bit more in depth. Because there also were conversations that we clearly could have had for much longer. But again, because of time, we had to cut those off. So having maybe that more retreat model would give us ample opportunity to finish those conversations. A lot of conversations or a lot of comments about repeating the opportunities and thinking it would be great, expanding it, you know, and having it offered for all staff. You know, and then having, again, more opportunities for staff, more general professional development type opportunities, and also creating more, you know, variety in the leadership opportunities, and maybe staff kind of coming up with those rather than just being, you know, top down from our leadership. And then, you know, feeling like sometimes people are being pigeonholed into their positions. And so showing staff that they can grow within the organization. And even if that means that they might move to another team, or that they might move somewhere outside of extension, you know, that they don't have to stay in this role. Because that's not necessarily what our work model is like anymore. People do tend to move around.
And just to jump in for a second,
Yeah.
there was one person in the chat who had shared that their institution, they have someone who's full-time focused on leadership development. That's
great.
probably not the norm, you know,
Yeah.
and it was a lot of work for me, and then a lot of work for everyone in this. And so some people said like, hey, let's do this again. My take is I'd rather, you know, pass the torch to someone else and have someone else, you know, maybe coordinate, but in a whole new group with, you know, really none of the people that were part of the first cohort participating in a second cohort, where, you know, it's likely that that cohort would be a totally different experience. They'd make different decisions, you know, and all sorts. I think that would be great, but it is, you know, a lot to ask, and without that dedicated, you know, person, and, you know, just without leadership development being, you know, a top priority, which I don't think it is. It's, you know, I'm not sure if it's going to happen. There were some people that had some ideas for cohorts that weren't leadership related, like more around program development and evaluation, or, you know, things like that. But it's very interesting to think, you know, how do you create conditions where things like this can be developed and can be sustained?
Yeah, great points. So, yep. So here's just a couple examples of articles and videos that people pulled that were outside of the book that we were going through. So you could see there were topics about, you know, communication, and especially in times of uncertainty, you know, what's going on with remembering the needs of followers during COVID, managing intergenerational conflict, you know, several on different kinds of conflict resolution. So you can see that maybe that was not the favorite chapter of the book. And so that group picked, you know, some different readings to look at for, you know, how do we manage conflict resolution. So those are examples of things that would have been sent to us ahead of time to read and review before. That would have been some of our homework that we did before. And then, you know, we would be prepared to have discussions about those in the session when we came back together. You want to go to the next one? And then this is just an example of a type of reflection activity that we would have done. Again, there was a lot of variability in what these looked like depending on what the groups put together. So this is just one example of many that we used during the cohort. But thinking about, you know, reflecting on the needs of followers within an organization. So this was coming from one of those articles. And what's your personal experience working in those organizations? And so consider, you know, trust, consider compassion and stability and hope. So those were some things that maybe we reflected on as we did the reading, or maybe we reflected on those during the cohort meeting and then went into a small group to discuss and then came back together as a large group. Again, there was some variation in how that reflection time would have been done either, beforehand or then during the cohort meeting.
And we're going to ask you how you might bring leadership development and, new ideas to your institution or team. But one final, reflection is we've talked about how it wasn't so focused on leadership skills. Something that, was a repeat theme that I didn't necessarily expect as much as we had it, but that was really powerful and profound was how personal our discussions were. People really opened up to each other. And it's amazing to be able to, to do that with colleagues, some of whom we knew going into it, some of whom, maybe we didn't, some of whom we work more closely with, some, we normally don't. And, the fact that these relationships can endure and that real, collaboration can come out of that. We all want to be more interdisciplinary in what we do, more strategic and impactful in what we do, and, working across teams with, with other thoughtful people. And that's the thing, the people that joined this cohort, it was a really special group of people, the types of people that you really want to collaborate with.
Yeah, I think something else that was really neat was that we had all of our program teams represented. So here we have 5 program teams in New Hampshire. And so we had somebody from each program team, at least one person. So that was kind of nice because then we had at least one representative that could kind of talk about, well, this is how things happen in this program team. This is how things might happen in 4-H or in community and economic development or in food and ag. So we could see some of the dynamics maybe happening within a program team. We also had people from all classifications of staff. If they weren't represented currently, then people in there had previously been in one of those classifications. So we, again, then had people from every single level within the organization represented. So we really got an understanding of what it's like for the administrative assistants, what it's like for our teachers and our program managers and our specialists. So I think that was something else that was really unique to this cohort that just worked out. There was no, intentional recruitment on Nate's part to make sure we had somebody from every single team and from every single classification. It just worked out that way. But I think it really just added to the richness of our conversations that we were really able to understand and look at leadership from all levels in all teams within our organization.
So for those who, hopefully you've been kind of putting pieces together as we've talked and started to think about ideas for, what you could bring back to your institution. If anyone wants to, throw any of those ideas in the chat or unmute and share, it'd just be really interesting to hear if, there are any ideas turning. And I just want to say in regards to the model that we pursued, we're not going to give you a how-to guide, a step-by-step how-to guide on how to do it. And I think we've kind of alluded to this, but really it's because this group of people made a decision on how they wanted to do this. And if you were doing something like this, pulling a group of people together, we would just encourage you to do the same thing, which is have the group decide what kind of experience they want to have. But Kendra and I are happy to chat with you and brainstorm offline as well. But any ideas people want to share, and then we'll maybe we could take a question or two as well. Yeah, starting a book club. I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, does anyone have any questions while you're thinking of ideas as well?
When you first started, you described like the peer development. I don't know what you called it. What was the name that you called it where the group kind of so designs it as they go a little bit. Did you have a term for that?
Yeah, what did I call it?
It was on one of
Did
your
I-
first slides. I
Did,
was like, my
did I call it,
I
yeah,
think it's
shared leadership or?
shared leadership, maybe?
peer-to-peer learning. Maybe.
Well, maybe it's not the official term, but anyway, I just thought that was, I appreciate that as that style of doing it so that you get that buy-in. And I feel like that really speaks to just adult learning in general, that, you know, if we buy into it, we're more likely to participate in it. So if we have that opportunity, so I like that strategy. But I think a mix of having some structure with it as well would help me be more successful, just needing that kind of a little bit of a script to follow, but having that input from others, I think would be really important too.
Yeah, no, I thought there were multiple benefits to doing it that way, and I feel silly for not remembering the term that I used, but it was an opportunity for people to actually put leadership into practice to some extent. There were some, you know, particularly administrative assistants in the group that maybe hadn't done something like that before. They hadn't, you know, planned and facilitated a session of their peers, and it was a really cool opportunity. And then also asking people, hey, you know, offline, you know, get together and go through a process of deciding as a small group what you want to do with a fairly big topic. So there are some different aspects to it. So not only do I think that it enriched the cohort experience itself, but it also provided additional opportunities, you know, for people to put ideas into practice in their small groups. Keeping an eye on the chat. Yep, and Melanie posted the link to a little feedback survey, so make sure to take that. Yeah, so Linda said they have a lunch and learn once a month where someone does a book review. It's well attended. Yeah, and I'm curious, Linda, you know, why you think it's well attended. And that's useful to think about, you know, why are some programs successful and others not successful? People are busy and our bandwidth is stretched. So what actually, you know, gets people to attend something like that over and over again?
Wow,
Yeah,
that's
so
that's
it's on
great.
Zoom, internal and external participants. 40 plus people. That's
great.
really great.
Yeah.
You're doing something right. And
Yeah.
sometimes maybe we reflect a lot on why programs aren't successful, and it's great. And it sounds like such a simple program too, but you know, what's drawing people? Well, it looks like it's about 3 o'clock. So Kendra and I just want to thank you for participating in this, and we would welcome, you know, conversations after this, and hope that this provided, you know, something useful to you as you think about how your institutions can, you know, ideate around leadership development, and just, you know, how important it is, which all of you know. Melanie's going to send out some kind of follow-up email. She can include our contact information in that. So, Kendra, any final words?
No, just thank you for coming, and yeah, happy to answer any questions. So feel free to reach out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have a great day, everyone. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.